Oh, yes.
With us. We sure about that because he's our keynote speaker. I know I can see online here that his presence, but right.
And we're live.
Yes, the minister's here. Just when you're ready.
Okay, we are live now.
Okay, in 1 minute.
Go, Chris, you're live.
Start with the video, right? So let's just go ahead and get straight into the program. I think we can go ahead and get started. We have all our speakers and everyone is ready.
We are live now. Please go ahead, Ms. Hobson.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Carissa Hobson. I am the National Coordinator of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network in Grenada.
Hi, I'm Kiefer Jackson, the National Coordinator of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network in Guyana.
Hello and welcome. My name is Julia San Pedro. I'm an intern in the Capacity Development and Innovation Office of the Unccd Secretariat in Bonn. The three of us will be the moderators of today's event, and we would like to welcome from wherever you are around the world to this wonderful panel discussion for young people about COVID-19, land, and the future of the Caribbean.
As you might already know, the current COVID-19 pandemic has created many challenges for various sectors, including public health, tourism, food security, and all other livelihoods within the Caribbean. Today, our discussion is aimed at energizing you as young people of the Caribbean and to play a major role in post-COVID-19 future of the region.
So we would like to welcome you to this panel discussion, and we hope that it'll be very interactive as well as informative. So please remember, throughout the event, we will have a chat open where you can leave us your questions from the different panelists. Questions will be answered in the Q&A round right after the panelist presentation.
Yes, so we have prepared this program very carefully for you, and we are sure that you are going to take away something from this. Now, before we get fully into today's event, we will hand over for a short moment to Professor Byron Cox, the head of the Capacity Development and Innovation Office at the Secretariat of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. So, Dr. Cox, the floor is yours. Oh, you are muted. Dr. Cox, you are muted.
I'm sorry. Yes, okay, thank you very much, Julia. I want to welcome everybody, in particular and especially our Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, the Honorable Hugh Todd. Mr. Todd has kindly agreed to address our session today. I want to welcome all of you, all the panelists, Ms. Tomlinson, everybody else, Ms. Beckles. This is supposed to be a very great exercise. Julia, do you expect me to do the 1 minute now from Mr. Brandt? Okay, so as I said, welcome everybody. I also, before I do that, let me just say this. I'm really happy that Cyen, on its executive director, Mr. Burke, agreed that we should have this exercise, which is so important to the Caribbean and the future of our people. I myself come from the Caribbean. Now, before we begin this program, I'd like to after I'm finished with this short introduction, to join me for 1 minute in honor and respect of a great man, Mr. Philbert Brown. Philbert Emmanuel Brown passed away on the 6th of May. He was the ambassador extraordinaire for the protection of bioproductive land of our Caribbean. He was Jamaica's UNCCD's national focal point for 2 decades, in which time he proved to be not just the Caribbean's most respected ambassador and diplomat, but a global champion for the UNCCD process. He was so revered by the international community for his work that he is the only person to have occupied every important position in the UNCCD process, including being the president of the COP, although Jamaica never hosted a COP. He left a great legacy, the greatest legacy of any UNCCD focal point in any part of the world. So today, in this special program, he was our son. He was our champion. He was a champion that we offered to the world. And so we should pay homage to this great man. So I would like to ask you to join me in a moment, in 1 minute, respect for this great Jamaican and Caribbean son. The minute begins now. May this son of our beautiful Caribbean civilization, this champion of humanity, may he rest in peace. May we be inspired by what he did, not just for Jamaica and the Caribbean, but for the world. Thank you very much indeed. Back over to you, Julia.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Byron Cox. And may the memory and legacy of Mr. Brown live on. Now, as we know, our discussion today, at the heart of it is our relationship with land. We would like to start things off with a short video showcasing work in Puerto Rico by the Cyen chapter there after Hurricane Maria. Let's have a look, turning to the technical team to show us a short video of some work in Puerto Rico. Technical team, we're waiting on the video.
Ms. Hapson.
Please let us know if we're having technical difficulties and we can just move on and we can come back.
If you technical difficulties, just move on. I'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I'll turn back over to Julia to introduce the next section.
Thank you, Kerry. So now let me introduce Mr. Reginald Burke, who is the Executive Coordinator of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, who will proceed with the institutional introduction on behalf of the Cyen and the Unccd as organizers of today's virtual panel discussion. Welcome, Mr. Burke. I'll give you the floor.
Good morning. Just let me get my mic together. Honorable Hugh Todd, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the Republic of Guyana. Professor Richard Byron Cox, Head of UNCCD's Capacity Development and Innovation Office. Mr. Nixon Barry, Chair of CYN's Regional Steering Committee, and members of the RSC, members of the Logistical Support Team from CYN and the UNCCD, participants, a very good morning to you all. And a very special good morning to my good friend and colleague, Philbert Brown. I'm sure he's smiling at this time. I'm absolutely thrilled to briefly speak to you on behalf of the organizers of today's event, the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, CYEN, and the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. CYN is a truly amazing and a dynamic community of over 600 young people from across the wider Caribbean region. Together, they work to ensure that youth have a facility that allows them to fully engage in safeguarding the Caribbean's natural resources. The UNCCD is the sole legally binding international agreement linking environment and development to sustainable land management. The agency has a comprehensive global commitment to achieve land degradation neutrality in order to restore the productivity of the world's degraded land and improve the livelihoods of more than 1.3 billion people. Over 25 years, Cyen and UNCCD have recognized that land, especially on island states, is a limited resource. Have worked assiduously to promote the sustainable management of this vital resource. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic has blatantly exposed the importance of land to humankind. The pandemic has highlighted a myriad of challenges, ranging from transmission of diseases to basic necessities such as water and food security. Today's webinar is designed to give young citizens the opportunity to voice their views, and we hope that you will take fullest advantage of this. On behalf of Cyen and the UNCCD, I welcome you and I thank you for participating. Over to you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Reggie. Now we can proceed to our special invited guest, Honorable Minister Hugh Todd. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Minister Todd to the audience today. Minister Todd is the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in Guyana. Minister Todd has immensely contributed to the advancement of Guyana's foreign policy and economic cooperation agenda. Prior to assuming the responsibility of Foreign Minister, Minister Todd has taught at the University of Guyana. He also served as the head of Department of Business and Management Studies at the university in the Faculty of Social Sciences, and he was also positioned as the assistant in the School of Entrepreneurship and Business Innovation. Mr. Todd is a former member of the Guyana Defense Force Coast Guard and attended the Britannia Royal Navy College in Dartmouth, United Kingdom. He served as craft commander, training officer, and location commander during his military career. Mr. Todd also served in the private sector, partnering in a cable television company. Minister Todd, again, it's my pleasure to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for that warm introduction. And good morning to all of you from beautiful Guyana. Professor Byron Cox, representatives of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, esteemed members of the panel, Youth of the Caribbean, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to participate in this morning's event, and I thank the Secretariat of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD, and the Caribbean Youth and Environment Network for the kind invitation. I also commend them for organizing this timely and forward-looking initiative. I describe today's event as timely because of what the science is showing us about land degradation and the attendant consequences. Consequences which are further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic that the world has been forced to grapple with. We are now in the second year of this global health crisis, and we have to take a hard, long, and earnest look at how we have been addressing major sustainable development issues, given the implications for a strong recovery. It is therefore appropriate, particularly for those of us who have been classified as most vulnerable, to advance the dialogue on these important issues with involvement of key stakeholders and with the view of generating innovative and impactful solutions. I also describe today's event as forward-looking, primarily because of the decision to factor in the role of the youth in the discourse on the post-COVID-19 future of the Caribbean. Not only do we need energy and the innovative thinking of the youth to help drive recovery efforts, we also need to provide opportunities and scope to develop their capacity as leaders of our future and as the future of our economy, our society, and our culture. Ladies and gentlemen, we know all too well the centrality of land to life on Earth. The way we use land, the way we use and manage land has multidimensional implications, including for energy, water, food, ecosystems, climate, and our health. Further, the science has shown us that land use change is the primary driver for emerging infectious diseases in humans. Currently, land degradation is taking place at an alarming rate, compromising ecosystems and threatening biodiversity, food, and water supply. Moreover, some land use activities are driving the climate crisis due to their carbon-intensive nature and are contributing to global warming, sea level rises, and erratic weather patterns, which in turn destroy the capability of the soil. Increasing drought across the world, coupled with periods of flooding, threatens agricultural production and food security. Against this backdrop, recovery and sustainability will be intricately linked to how we effectively mitigate against land degradation. Permit me to spend a few moments reflecting on the realities in our region of the Caribbean. As you're aware, Caribbean countries, which are all categorized as small island developing and low-lying coastal states, have a number of structural and geophysical challenges, which have resulted in these countries being classified as inherently vulnerable. Our special circumstances include a vulnerability to natural disasters, the effects of climate change, fragile economies, and limited natural resource base. In recent times, our weak healthcare systems have also been highlighted as we struggle to adapt to the COVID-19 crisis, particularly in the early period. In this context, this is the context in which countries of the Caribbean are pursuing sustainable development, and the COVID-19 pandemic has added another layer of difficulty while also exacerbating pre-existing challenges. In fact, CARICOM countries have been assessed as being among the economically worst affected by the fallout from the pandemic. As we consider climate change in particular and what it means to our region, the evidence is growing, which points to the phenomenon as an existentialist threat. Extreme weather patterns, rising sea levels, degradation of habitats are just a few of the attendant consequences. Without proportionate levels of resilience, our vulnerability increases. How do we sustainably manage the resources we have? We have to mount an adequate response to the challenges we are facing. Challenges which have been made starker by the entrance of the COVID-19 pandemic. And more specific to today's engagement, could we perhaps take a closer look at land use with a view of being more innovative and sustainable in our approach in order to generate the solutions we so desperately need at the current juncture? I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that given the centrality of land to life, it can provide many of the answers that we're looking for. And I will spend a few minutes sharing Guyana's experience with the hope of inspiring you, our young people especially, to think of how we can make a difference in your respective spheres of operation and influence. Guyana's land use and land management strategies and policies are premised on our recognition of the centrality of land to livelihoods, food security, biodiversity preservation, water management, and climate change, and are also driven by our commitment to adopting a sustainable approach to land in recognition of our obligation to preserve this resource for future generations. On this note, Guyana ratified the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification in June of 1997, signaling its readiness to join the international community in addressing the major economic, social, and environmental threats presented by desertification and land degradation. While Guyana's experience is not severe enough to be described as desertification, there is incidence of land degradation affecting a little more than 16% of our total land mass, which compels us to address the productive capacity of the land. Our goal is to achieve land degradation neutrality, and we are taking a number of steps to this end. We have developed a number of action plans along with the National Drought Plan and have deliberately aligned our national plans with the Unccd strategic plan. Further, in keeping with our obligations under the Unccd, we have completed all required national reports and are currently implementing the Sustainable Land Development and Management Project with our own funds. The aim of this project is to create an enabling environment for the development of a national land policy, promoting sustainable and climate resilient land development, management, and reclamation. Ladies and gentlemen, Guyana has a very high forest cover and is therefore a net carbon sink. Recognizing that our forests are providing invaluable climate services not only to the local population, but to the world at large. We are pursuing a low carbon development strategy with the aim of incentivizing standing forests in an effort to reduce global carbon emissions. In an effort to keep deforestation rates low, we're also using the monitoring, reporting, and verification system, which tracks Guyana's forest cover and deforestation rate and determines the extent and causes of forest degradation. Guyana has also made available to the international community close to 1 million hectares of pristine forested lands for sustainable development, conservation, and research in light of the rich biodiversity resident in our forests. Moreover, Guyana has set aside 8.5% of our territory as legally protected areas, taking us closer to the achievement of the Unccd Biodiversity Target 11, which aims to ensure that coastal, marine, terrestrial, and inland waters are conserved through a well-established protected area system. At the regional level, Guyana has put forward a very ambitious plan to achieve food security within CARICOM, and that would see the region becoming a net exporter of food. The COVID pandemic has had a deleterious impact on the region's agri-food agenda, most notably on food and nutrition security. To advance the development and implementation of this plan, it would be critical for us to take a collective look at land use practices with a view of ensuring that our actions are not at odds with our policies. This is especially necessary when we think about the intricate link between land, the quality of food production, and the spread of infectious diseases. Having long been recognized as the breadbasket of the Caribbean, Guyana has experiential knowledge that could prove useful for the region, even as we seek to build stronger further from this pandemic. Permit me here to also reference one notable regional endeavor in which 7 Caribbean countries, including Guyana, are engaged to promote sustainable land management and climate resilient food systems. The Caribbean SIDS Soil Care Project aims to provide Caribbean SIDS with the tools for developing and implementing policies, measures, and best practices, while supporting the review of legal institutional frameworks to achieve climate resilient land degradation neutrality. Ladies and gentlemen, as a region, we are now compelled to increase our efforts to achieve sustainable development goals, particularly now that we have entered a decade of action for delivery for sustainable development. COVID-19 has presented a serious setback to the development gains we have managed to achieve, but it's critical for us to regroup and push forward. We all need a hands-on board to do this. For the Caribbean, we already know what our priorities are: land degradation neutrality, net zero carbon emissions, sustainable management of our forests, sustainable and climate smart agricultural practices, biodiversity conservation, among others. We have to work to manage mindsets if we are looking towards a sustainable post-COVID-19 future. Our citizens have to be taught to think sustainably, and we can begin by continuously engaging the young minds with a view of engendering new attitudes. It would also be useful to revisit our school curricula, to incorporate climate change and land management as the priority areas of focus. As I consider the work that is ahead of us in building a strong post-COVID-19 future and in an accelerating and implementation of the 2030 agenda, I'm convinced that the youth can and should contribute actively to this work. Significantly, young people account for some 16% of the world's population and should therefore be included in the efforts to achieve sustainable, inclusive, and stable societies and to mitigate the challenges that we are confronting in this regard, including climate change, biodiversity loss, and now COVID-19. In their contribution to the development of the 2030 agenda, young people have already demonstrated their capacity to engage substantively on development issues and are becoming increasingly active partners on sustainable development. Today's event is but another testimony to this reality. The onus is therefore on governments to continue creating the space to utilize the knowledge, experience, and expertise of our young people. They must be empowered to participate meaningfully in policymaking by elaborating their priorities for human development and for sustainable development of their communities and for the shared planet. Cognizant of the need to take this inclusive approach, the President of Guyana, His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, has demonstrated visionary leadership with the initiative to establish a Youth Advisory Council directly under his purview. The objective of establishing such a council is to provide a platform for directly engaging young people on issues surrounding jobs, education, housing, the environment, and other key areas of relevance. Through the council, a permanent forum will be available for constant dialogue with the youth on policy making. For this year's budget, the government of Guyana has allocated some 60 million Ghana dollars to operationalize the council. In addition to the President's Youth Advisory Council, the government of Guyana is working to foster greater community involvement on the part of youth and has developed several initiatives, including Youth Innovation Project, which creates opportunities for young people to become entrepreneurs and to propose solutions and to the challenges in their communities, utilizing science, technology, engineering, agriculture, archaeology, arts, mathematics, or spirituality themes. We have also launched the Young Influencers program to prepare youths to make a difference within their communities by creating linkages with their peers across the country to generate innovative solutions to various issues that need to be addressed within their communities. As observed in the United Nations 2020 World Youth Report, while the international community will play an essential role in providing overall leadership by bringing stakeholders together and channeling international financial support, real solutions to the challenges people face will begin and end at home. Consequently, the involvement of every segment of society is warranted. Young people of the region, I encourage you to rise to the mammoth challenges confronting us and see them as opportunity to innovate. The surge in the demand for digital technologies is an extremely promising area, and many of you have been making commendable strides in ICTs. I encourage you to also stay informed, to devise effective solutions. You have to understand the issues well. Information is now at your fingertips. We only need to be diligent in accessing it. Make sustainability your watchword. Embrace and practice sustainable consumption of production patterns. Repair, reuse, recycle. The future is yours to lead, so do not delay preparations for doing so effectively. Endeavor to nurture and preserve our planet so that your children can receive a healthy inheritance. I again congratulate the Unccd Secretariat and the Cyen for organizing this panel discussion, and I encourage you to have free, frank, and solution-oriented discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure I declare open the panel discussion. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you very much for your great opening address, full of truths that, of course, need to be heard. Honorable Minister, it has been a real pleasure to be able to count on you to bring such an important message to the youth of the Caribbean. And as the Honorable Minister just has mentioned, the action of young people in the environment area, and specifically in the area of sustainable land management, is crucial in the new horizon of sustainable development. That's why we have prepared a video collecting different ideas and projects showing different ways in which young people from the French, English, and Spanish Caribbean are involved, contributing with their action to a more sustainable future for the region. So let's move on to the video.
Elijah, we can't hear the song.
Exportaciones de alimentos. Es por esto que decidimos trabajar por la deforestación y seguridad alimentaria, trabajar por la deforestación. Comenzamos a trabajar por los sectores más afectados. Comenzamos a trabajar por los sectores más afectados. Comenzamos a trabajar por los también tengamos que trabajar también en la comunidad, también en la
Hi, Julie, you're back.
Thank you. Muchísimas gracias. Sigo ahí en Puerto Rico por vuestro video. Thank you so much for your video. And congratulations on the excellent work that you are doing on your chapter. Now let me introduce the next. Let's go to the next.
Yes, Julia, I can take it from here. Thank you.
Yeah, please, let's go to the next panelist.
So we will start our panel discussion now, and we will delve a little more deeply into our topics with our in-depth presentation on issues related to land. Our first presentation will be on the topic of land and food security, and we are pleased to welcome again, Dr. Richard Byron Cox to deliver on this topic. Dr. Byron Cox is a national of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and is trained in law, diplomacy, foreign policy, and international relations with a PhD in public international law. He started his career in the Ministry of Legal Affairs of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and later joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as chief advisor to both the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister on matters of foreign policy and international law and relations. He has been working for the United Nations organizations for more than 2 decades, dealing with issues of sustainable development. Dr. Byron Cox is presently the head of the Capacity Development and Innovation Office at the Secretariat of the Unccd, and there he is responsible inter alia for spearheading the Capacity Development Program, coordinating the Internship Mentorship Program, and leading the Secretariat's program on innovations. In his present work, Dr. Byron Cox has realized many firsts, including masterminding the conceptualization, design, development, and implementation of the Unccd Capacity Building Marketplace, its exclusive e-learning platform, as well as the world's first ever project aimed at achieving land degradation neutrality in 14 countries around the world. Dr. Byron Cox has tremendous experience in lecturing as well, having been a special guest and/or distinguished lecturer at many universities around the world, including in South Korea, Bonn, the UK, and London, London, Turkey, Addis Ababa, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Havana, and Sweden. He's a visiting lecturer at the University of Cologne in Germany and the Centre International de Formation European, France. Dr. Byron Cox has contributed chapters to books on law and environment. He writes for newspapers and journals on many subjects, including international law, international environmental law, and politics, and on Caribbean affairs. He has published, to critical acclaim, the historical novel, Were Mama's Tears in Vain? Dr. Byron Cox, welcome again, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hobson. I hope Mr. James is with us and can do the technology for me, please. Mr. James, if you can share my presentation. Before I go on, let me thank Minister Hugh Todd very much indeed, Your Excellency, for an excellent presentation, which was comprehensive in the amount of areas it covered, and in particular, paying attention to the youths. I only have 7 minutes, so I know this is a challenge, but I will do my best. Mr. James, can you share the presentation if you're there? Mr. James? Hello?
I am Dr. Cox. Just give me a second. I'll come to you really quickly to start.
Right. So please share the presentation if you may, sir. Yes, I'm going to talk about Mr. James. The presentation is not up. I don't know.
Sorry, Dr. Cox, there's a bit of a delay. Just start and I will get to you in just a second.
Okay, but I'm going to talk to you about, while Mr. James sought out the technology first, I'm going to talk to you about land and the question of our food security. And this is a very, very serious question. Now, let's hope Mr. James can get the presentation up. But my presentation deals with the issue of land, food security in our Caribbean today. And you might think this is a simple matter and that this is something that you can easily just brush aside. That's a mistake. But before we get into actually what is food security in the Caribbean and how land plays with that, I think we need to understand what land is, first and foremost. And there are many different many definitions of land. If you look at economics, for example, if you look at Adam Smith, he would tell you that land is the first sort of input into production. And because there are 4 factors of production according to Adam Smith, and land takes rent as it's part of, you know, the business operation. Most people just think of land as the solid surface of the earth, so that the earth is divided into water and into land. And other people see land as different things, you know, like the territory of a country, so to speak. However, what I'm talking about here is something called bioproductive land. That is land that produces food, but not just food. That land is also responsible for 2 other things: water and oxygen. And without those, whether you believe it or not, we cannot live. You can have the latest SUV and whatever else you have. Without food, water, and air, you will die. It's only a matter of time, but you will. Now, in our Caribbean, as regards land, and the minister made that point, in most cases, except for Guyana and probably Suriname, land is an extremely limited business in our Caribbean today. Countries like St. Vincent and St. Lucia and so on, St. Kitts and so on, we have very limited space. That's the first thing. Secondly, a lot of our arable land, our arable agricultural land, the lands that we should use for agriculture, is now being used for housing and so on and so forth, putting even more pressure on the already limited land. And thirdly, of course, we have this problem where we seem not to, until recently, understand the role of land in our development as a whole, and in particular, in sustainable development. So that is what land is. We are talking about the bioproductive land. No, that's the first part of the question. Second part of the question, of course, is food security, because that's what I'm talking about. What do we actually mean when we talk about food security? What is it we are discussing? Well, there are different sort of ways of understanding that, and you have different definitions. But there are 2 very important elements. The first is availability. If food is not available to you, then you don't have it. So you're not food secure. You understand? That's the first thing. And the second is accessibility. There might be a lot of food, but if it's locked up somewhere and you cannot access it, then of course you have no security, because the food is there, but you will still die of starvation because you cannot access the food. So therefore, those 2 things are important. But even if the food is available, and even if it's accessible, but it's not enough. In other words, you need a certain amount of food every day to keep you alive. And if you only get 10% of that, you're still starving and might still die. You understand? But even if you were to get all the food you need, but it's not healthy food, it would also kill you. So what we're looking at here when we talk about food security, we're talking about availability, accessibility, sufficiency, and the kind of food that you need for your health. Without that, you cannot claim to have food security, but that is at the personal level. Let us get that clear. And what we're talking about here is the Caribbean region. So we're not just talking about Richard Barry, 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 we're not just talking about we're talking about somebody else? Is it a question of philosophy? Oh, you know, we want to live like the Americans and eat like the Americans, or we want to live and eat like the British. Is it a question of philosophy? Is it a question of lifestyle and culture? Do we lack the land to produce the food? I doubt that. As the Honorable Minister just told us, Ghana has always been the food basket of the Caribbean. We have enough land. We don't have a lot of it overall, but we have enough, right? And what happens in issues? Is it an issue where natural disasters stop us from doing this? This is not so either. If it was so, then it would have stopped the colonialists from making us into agricultural plantations, from making us into agricultural plantations. We don't have the lessons, have a lot of it, but we have but we have from the ground. And this is part of the food in our country. It's in the ground, right? It's in the ground. Between what is called the red and orange zone in St. Vincent is also destroyed. So what happens then when we have these natural disasters? COVID-19 is just one in them, you know, but the Eastern Caribbean is a place that faces hurricanes every year. So those are the issues. So what then should be the basic philosophy if we're going to deal with food security? What then should be the basic principle? Should we become the main suppliers of our food, or should we still allow it to be like the way it is now, where we import so much, right? Do we determine what we consume, or do we just buy what is sold to us, right? Should we be the first beneficiaries of our food, or should somebody else? Because $8 billion is a lot of money to spend on food, you know, but somebody else benefiting from that $8 billion. Right? Do we need to change the concept and understanding of our food needs, you understand, and how we deal with that? And then again, when you're buying food from other people, they can dictate the price to you. And that leads back to the whole question of availability, sufficiency, accessibility, and so on. Because if you can't pay for it, it might be an issue of which lives matter, right? And then, how much of you young people listening to me think that you have a stake in the food industry? In other words, do you really relate to this business as part of your business? Of course, if we're going to tackle any of those things I mentioned above, we have to tackle it from upstream. You understand? And food production, whether you like this or not, begins and ends with our land. That is where it begins and where it ends. And therefore, the land is central to the issue. I'm almost done. Just 2 more slides and then we're done. Now, the other thing about food security, you know, in our Caribbean today, and it's a mistake that we make, is that we tend to see food security in isolation, and we don't see it in relation to the rest of our security. Now, we know that non-communicable diseases are rampant in many parts of the Caribbean. And that has to do with diet in many cases, high blood pressure, diabetes, and so on. So you're compromising your health security. When you can't afford food because you're buying it from somebody else, you're compromising the social standard of living. When food is manufactured somewhere else and jobs that should be home in the Caribbean, you're providing jobs for somebody else. It has an economic effect. But I also mentioned the issue of the balance of payments, you understand? Because $8 billion is leaving the region, you know, $8 billion US dollars is leaving the region. That's 16 billion Barbados dollars. It's almost 20 billion EC dollars. Think of that. And of course, what happens to our environment? A lot of what we buy come in plastic and so on. Look how much plastic is in the Caribbean Sea and why. What is the ecological effect? If you drink a coconut water, you know, when you finish drinking it, you know, you throw the shell, you know, in the forest or whatever, it naturally just goes back into the system and works itself back into the system. You buy a plastic bottle with a chubby, and that's an issue. Now, the fundamental thing is this. If you cannot afford food, sooner or later, As Bob Marley once said, a hungry man, well, not just Bob Marley, Sparrow actually said it first. A hungry man is an angry man. It threatens peace. The point I'm trying to make is that we cannot relate to food security in isolation. We have to see the broader security of the Caribbean when we discuss this question. As I said, just 2 more slides and I'm done. So we come to what the minister talked about, the youths. But before we do that, let's look at the simple truth. The land is where we must begin in our quest for food security. It is from the land that we get it, whether it's bananas, sugar, rice, whatever. It is from the land we get it. So the land is key to this whole thing. And it must be an integral part of what we talk about as regards sustainable development. Now, what is the key role of youth? I want to bring this to your attention. The theme for 2021 International Youth Day is transforming food systems. You hear me? That is the theme. Youth innovation for human and planetary health. That in itself should tell you that the world itself sees the role of the youth in this question as regards food systems and transforming them. And if there's need for transformation, please believe me, we in the Caribbean need a transformation. We have to stop sending $8 billion abroad. We have to stop doing this, right? And we have to find a way to ensure that the 45% in one country where people go to sleep hungry every night, that has got to stop. And we have to make sure that the other 4 or 5 countries where you have 9% desperate poverty, we need to deal with that. Because we have to be concerned with the future. And you are the young people. And you're going to sit down and let old heads like me dictate to you and tell you what to do, you know. And we have spoiled things. That is what we have taken you to. 8 billion going out the region every year. Or you're going to get up and say, no. We have to change this. So finally, where do we go from here? I'm a little bit over 7 minutes, but it's not my fault. The technology didn't work. Where do we go from here? I ask you these questions as young people. I ask us all these questions. Is this really an urgent concern? This concern about food security, is it really an urgent concern? And should you, the young people, be occupied with it? Think of these things and think of them seriously. Can we really fix it? And if so, how? Or you think we don't need to fix it? Should there be national approaches? Or should there be a regional approach? Or should there be a combination of those approaches? Is this a question of policy, culture, economics, or is it another question? Is it a question that the Caribbean still believe that what is best for us, including our own food, must come from abroad? You know, we are tied up with this, oh, the European standard this, and the European standard that, and the European standard this. And we're never concerned with what is best for us. Even our tourism, you know, our tourism is first and foremost, well, you know, bringing the Europeans up. And what about the Belgian who come to St. Vincent, or the Jamaican who comes to Trinidad, or the Trinidadian who goes to Barbados? Why can't we think it that way? Or the Guyanese who come to St. Vincent, you know? And it's the same thing with our health, you know. You know, we should keep the place clean and healthy because we have tourists coming. So your health doesn't matter. The question is, in dealing with this food security, there are 3 things. The food itself, where it comes from, which is the land, and thirdly, what is your role as young people? Thank you very much indeed. I'm done.
Okay, so we would like to apologize to our audience for the technical issues that we had during Dr. Cox's presentation. Now, fortunately, it has been fixed, so we can continue. Thank you so much for your great presentation, Dr. Brian Cox. It's fortunate to have an expert like you with so much experience in the area of sustainable development, dealing with such an important issue in the Caribbean, especially during the current pandemic. Now, I would like to invite our audience to answer the last question that Dr. Cox raised in his presentation. What must be the first step if any action is to be taken? You can just leave your you can just write your answer in the chat. We would love to read your answers, and we would like to remind our audience that you can just write any question that you might have in the chat during today's panel discussion, and that after all the presentations, we will select as many questions as possible for the Q&A segment. And as we move to our second presentation, it's my pleasure to introduce Mrs. Maria Becles, member of the Cyen in Barbados, who is part of the organization Biodiversity Working Group. Mr. Becles is a graduate of the University of the West Indies at Cape Hill in Barbados, completing her master's in natural resource and environmental management at the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies. Following this, she has pursued works in coral reef restoration under the Blue-Green Initiative, which seeks to promote sustainable development in the Caribbean region. Mrs. Becles will present today on the topic land and biodiversity. Welcome, Mrs. Becles. You have the floor.
Right, thank you so much for the introduction. Just give me a second to share my screen. So I'll get my presentation going. All right, so I'm going to start talking to you a bit on land and biodiversity in the Caribbean, and I think it's important to start with what exactly is sustainable land management. And there are a few definitions on what this is. One I selected was according to the United Nations. This is the use of land resources, including soils, water, animals, and plants for the production of goods to meet changing human needs while simultaneously ensuring the long-term productive potential of these resources and the maintenance of their environmental function. However, this is a bit of a long-winded explanation, and I think a short video clip I included from The Lion King, ironically enough, kind of pretty much sums up what the essence of sustainable land management is. Hopefully my audio works quite well for this.
Look, Simba, everything the light touches is our kingdom.
Wow.
A king's time as ruler rises and falls like the sun. One day, Simba, the sun will set on my time here and will rise with you as the new king.
And this'll all be mine?
Everything.
Everything the light touches.
And he isn't wrong to say that. Everything the light touches really is our kingdom to protect. And simply put, this is exactly what sustainable land management is. It is nothing more than people looking after the land for the present and future generations. But how exactly does biodiversity fit into this? And I'm going to get to that shortly, but why sustainable land management is important, we really need to preserve our vulnerable land areas. And as was previously said, SIDS are extremely vulnerable to a number of factors. And we would also like to rehabilitate whatever degraded land we have, because we can't afford to lose what precious land space we have. And this management approach is based on these four principles. Institutional support, it must be participatory, must take into account an ecosystem approach, and must have multi-level and multi-stakeholder involvement. So going on to where biodiversity fits into this. And biodiversity really and truly is one of the most valuable resources we have available. And same way we're affected by the way we use our land, our biodiversity is impacted by the way we use our land. And sadly, despite being one of the 35 biodiversity hotspots in the world, with our endemic regional fauna accounting for 2.6% of the world's 300,000 plant species and 3.5% of the world's over 27,000 vertebrate species, we're currently seeing a loss in habitat and whatnot and biodiversity. So I'm pretty much just gonna go over a few of the reasons why this would have been happening over time as we continue to develop as a region. And one of them stems from our colonial history. We would have had a lot of unsustainable land agricultural practices implemented from plantation era. And sad to say, some of these are still very pervasive to this day. In for example, slash and burn agricultural practice, which is actually responsible for a wide range of habitat loss. And an example of this can be seen with the endemic species, Dominica's national bird, the imperial Amazon. It would have suffered tremendously from habitat loss, and right now is actually critically endangered. Another reason why we may see a good set of environmental degradation is our reliance on extractive procedures to reach these natural resources on which we're very dependent on, for revenue generation, such as mining and quarrying. And as a result, these will also result in habitat loss, which affects our flora and fauna. We're also heavily dependent on tourism. And as we all know, the majority of our coastal development is focused in the coastal zone. And as you can see from this picture, this is just the west coast of Barbados, a snapshot of Old Town, and it shows the extent to which our platinum coast has been developed. And the problem with this development is that it comes at a cost of coastal erosion. And seen in this photo here as well, there's a number of coastal engineering structures which have to be put into place to actually combat this. And this coastal erosion, which is a type of habitat loss, is not only a thorn in the side of tourism, whereby, you know, you'll have to cater to the tourists coming in because they want to use our beaches, they want the sea, sand, fun, and a lot of it. But it's also, especially in Barbados, it's a very big impact to our nesting sea turtles, because with Barbados being the second largest hawksbill rookery in the region, our nesting females are every year losing precious habitat space, which they need to successfully nest and usher in the next generation of turtles around the region. And this is actually creating a problem for the Barbados Sea Turtle Project, whereby they're having to do increasing numbers of nest relocations, because this habitat degradation is causing a lot of our females to actually lose viable nesting space, so it's forcing them to nest closer to the high water, putting the nest at risk of being flooded. So we now have to try to find usable beach space to ensure the sorry, just lost my train of thought a bit. So we just pretty much have a lot of relocations happening as a result of this degradation, and we really want to ensure that this critically endangered species has a fighting chance at survival. Additionally, with our coastal development, you tend to see a lot of loss of coastal forestation. And another example of this in Barbados would have been with the construction over time of the Sandals property in Maxwell along our south coast. So this shot here from 2005, is pretty much where the site of Sandals presently is. And as you can see, if I can just get the laser pointer, this area here is pretty much large, dense coastal forested area. And as you can see, with time, we would have had the erection of the first hotel space here, which would have been Couples Resort at the time before it was taken over by Sandals. And as Sandals continued their expansion of the property for bolstering the tourism industry, you see a massive loss of our coastal forestation, which is at a detriment to our local biodiversity. And additionally, we may not think of it in this way, but our marine space is technically an extension of our land. And what we do on land impacts our marine space as well. And we rely on this marine space for generation of tourism revenue as well, especially with things such as Swim with the Sea Turtle, tourist attractions like that, that earn millions of dollars in revenue for Barbados. And this, even though it's using this land space in a non-consumptive fashion, is pretty much still going to have negative impacts to our water quality, and it's still going to have negative impacts on our coral reef ecosystems as well, be it from inexperienced divers who come to explore the reef and may potentially break a piece off, or even tourist operators dropping anchor for a lack of moorings in the area and also causing damage to the coral reef, which is in itself a protective structure to the land to prevent further coastal erosion. So if we're losing that coastal protection, we're going to see more impacts on land, and it's going to affect us even more. Additionally, our reduced climate change resilience, poor enforcement of development plans, lack of human resources, are also things which compound this loss of biodiversity. And in many cases, the environmental value of these areas tend to be very much undervalued. And in some instances in the past, there would have been cases of poor governance which led us to our present biodiversity problems. However, this presentation, it may sound like all gloom and doom, but that's really not the case. There are a number of initiatives throughout the region who are actually trying to rehabilitate a lot of our lost lands or trying to prevent further degradation of the land. And one example I'm going to focus on today is WIRED in Barbados. So who is WIRED? This is the Walker's Institute for Regenerative Research, Education, and Design. They're a pretty young non-profit organization in Barbados, born out of the restoration of the Walker's Sand Quarry in St. Andrew. And this organization, some of their main goals are the mitigation of associated impacts with extractive practices, the rehabilitation of land following extractive practices, as well as promoting ecological and agricultural tourism, while simultaneously providing a meaningful livelihood for the residents of St. Andrew and neighboring parishes, knowing that agriculture would be one of the main livelihoods for residents in that area. So this right now here is just a picture of the Walker's Reserve as it is right now following restoration. And this site is pretty much characterized by coastal forests, sand dunes, clay hills, ponds, and wetlands. And it currently occupies 300 acres of land of the original quarry space. And what's also important about this site is that Walker's Quarry pretty much is one of the last, sorry, not one of, it is the last remaining sand dune system of this size in the island of Barbados. So pretty much years before, it would have looked a lot more like this, where they would have been actively mining. And there is still some active mining on the quarry site. However, it's restricted to a smaller area because they've reclaimed a large portion of it to create the Walker's Reserve now. So for the past 50 years, this quarry would have been the lone, and I think it still is the lone silica sand quarry on the island, providing a much needed resource for our construction around the island. And this being the case, it means that many of the construction projects in Barbados, many of the housing of various parts of infrastructure would have been made using sand from this quarry. So pretty much as a part of their restoration process, they would have employed restorative agroforestry, and permaculture design principles in order to bolster the ecosystem for services that would have been lost, as well as to stabilize the land and pretty much encourage reintroduce biodiversity to the space. And they have been very successful. In this area, they have actually been seeing a lot of migratory wetland birds and other migratory birds, which typically come to the island. They've been utilizing this space as well. As you can see here, I have a blue heron here to the bottom left of the screen, a lesser yellow-legged and even peregrine falcon. And I was told by a friend of mine who works there, she's their project officer and manager. She even mentioned to me that there's a resident osprey who started even using the area. So you're seeing biodiversity actually returning to the area. And additionally, as I mentioned, they would have been using permaculture principles whereby they're incorporating agriculture. So you see them here growing various fruits, which would provide a livelihood opportunities for residents of St. Andrew and neighboring parishes as well, to more or less help them meet their goals. But this by no extension is the extent of the work being undertaken by WIRED. There have various community outreach programs going on, and they actually take on volunteers fairly regularly. So I do encourage you to check out WIRED at their website, wired.org. That's WIRED with 2 R's. So at this point, I would pretty much like to wrap up my presentation here and thank you all for your attention. And as Mufasa said, remember, everything the light touches is our kingdom, and we need to make sure that the Simbas of the next generation can take over from what we have done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beckles. You have done a fantastic job of drawing the parallels, not just to how land degradation is impacting biodiversity, but how it affects our economy. So thank you once again. We remind our attendees that you can place your questions in the chat to allow us to address them during the Q&A segment. So far we have addressed 2 critical issues related to land, that of food security and biodiversity. We get ready now to discuss a 3rd important topic on land and water. Today we are happy to welcome Mr. Chetwynd Osborne to our panel to share with us on this topic. Mr. Osborne has worked at the Natural Resource Management and Environmental Research Institute of the University of Belize. He holds a bachelor's in biology from the University of Guyana, a master's in biodiversity conservation and sustainable development from the University of the West Indies and the University of Belize, and a certificate of project management professional from the Project Management Institute. Currently, he's a lecturer at the University of Guyana and also serves as a technical advisor to the Partnership Initiative on Sustainable Land Management, or PISLM. He's currently pursuing his PhD studies in environmental and life sciences at Trent University in Canada. Mr. Osborne undertakes research in ecology, biotechnology, and systematics or taxonomy. One of his recently completed projects is titled The Relationship Between Resilient Mangroves and Fish Populations in the Largest Marine Reserve in Belize, a Case for Conservation. Much of his work and research revolves around the SDGs 13 on climate action, 14 on life below water, and 15 on life on land. And he's a strong advocate for youth involvement in sustainable development. It is indeed a pleasure to have you here with us this morning, Mr. Osborne. You have the floor.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, for those kind words of introduction. And I certainly want to express gratitude to the organizers of this session, the Cyen and the Unccd, for giving me the opportunity to just provide a brief presentation in terms of the land and water management nexus. In my presentation, I intend to provide an introduction, basically setting the Caribbean context as it relates to land and water management, give some key actions and initiatives that can seek to bridge the gap between land and water management internationally, as well as some of the work that is being done regionally and that is ongoing. And I will certainly end with some recommendations that can seek to provide some guidance to sort of better recognize the benefits of the land-water nexus. In terms of the Caribbean context, as we are aware, all CARICOM member states have ratified the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And this convention is a sole legally binding land-based convention that seeks to link environment as well as development to sustainable land management. The implementations of the objectives, even though the Unccd may not get a recognition that it should get over the years, it's still, in terms of implementing the other Rio Convention, Unccd is quite an important aspect, and also it has bearings in terms of us achieving the goals set out for Agenda 2030. All CARICOM member states have also agreed to implementing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular, SDG 15, which focuses on land issues, with target 15.3, which deals with achieving land degradation neutrality. And as relates to land degradation neutrality, the Unccd serves as a custodian for this target. And over the years, they have been providing tremendous support to many Caribbean member states, as well as other annexes in terms of actions and plans and practices in order for us to successfully achieve this target. Land degradation is certainly a consequence of human as well as climate drivers. And Caribbean countries have been affected by land degradation in many ways through tropical cyclones, mining, and drought over the years. And based on statistics that were actually derived from our submissions during the 2017-2018 reporting cycle, land degradation basically ranged from 0.2 to as high as 81.4%. So even though we might have our unique peculiarities, there's still some amount of land degradation that is taking place. In some cases, it may be low, and in other cases may be high. But we all need to have some sort of collective efforts as we try to tackle this issue and seek to balance losses with gains. Because many times persons may hear the term land degradation neutrality, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that you're not doing anything with the land, but it's more so whatever we take out, we definitely want to put back in. So we have that balance in everything. And there was the new strategic framework for the Unccd for the period 2018 to 2030, and is often dubbed as one of the most comprehensive actions or action-oriented strategy in order to ensure that we achieve a land degradation neutral world. We ensure that there is food security and ensure that we are combating drought. And it is sort of guided by these 5 strategic objectives. But in particular, strategic objective 2, which deals with indicators and trends of safe drinking water, is quite an important aspect when we speak of the land-water nexus. And Certainly mitigating land degradation certainly leads to increased water productivity. And given the benefits that we can actually derive from this, it's very important that we recognize some of these benefits and work as far as possible to basically tap into these. So every land use decision is certainly a water use decision. So given this inherent interconnectedness between land and water, we definitely need to ask ourselves why we're not, seen as far as possible to further realize this and seek the immense benefits that can come from such an integrated approach. Because gains in water productivity will only be obtained alongside improvements in land management, because everything that we do on land certainly has effects on what takes place in our water ecosystems. And oftentimes, many persons, when they hear water, they look at it as a standalone, but the water exists on land, so it's also an extension of land. Soil erosion, nutrient depletion, and other forms of land degradation reduce water productivity, affects water availability, quality, and storage. So whatever we do on land, we certainly need to ensure that our practices are sustainable if we are to ensure that we preserve what takes place in our aquatic ecosystem. So the interconnectedness of land and water certainly warrants a nexus-oriented thinking, where we certainly need to move away from this conventional or the traditional silo sort of thinking in terms of land and water governance, because we often develop policies that are specific to land and policies that are specific to water. But given the fact that these ecosystems are interconnected, we have to look and see how far as possible we can have a more integrated approach to the kind of policies, the strategies, as well as the plans that we develop to address the whole land and water management governance. Integrated water resource management concept certainly promotes a coordinated development and management of water and land-related resources. If we are to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, tends to lead to greater water and land use efficiency and higher agricultural yields. So at the same time, we are mitigating greenhouse gas, so we are addressing issues of climate change. We are addressing issues in terms of having greater water productivity. And with that, we are also addressing food security in the same approach. So definitely we have to start thinking along these lines to ensure that whatever we do are integrated and we try to maximize on our efforts. Integrated systems approach to water and land management would certainly reduce costs and increase benefits to both human and nature. And this is something that we all look for, because we are able to address three pillars: economic, environment, as well as the social pillar. So we're more definitely moving along a path of sustainable development. When we think of the nexus, the whole aspect of food comes into the mix. So you have indirect drivers, which can be in the form of demographics, economic growth, science and technology, among others. Direct drivers, climate change, which we're all experiencing, demand and consumption for food, as well as natural resource extraction, as my colleague earlier touched on. And based on that, some of the human well-being and environmental sustainability that can be garnered from us having that sort of nexus-oriented thinking: food and nutrition security, improve health, enhance livelihoods, environmental quality, among many others that can actually be derived from this. Given the interconnections of land and water, we definitely need to move away from the silo management approach and embrace a more integrated land and water management approach. And actions are necessary now. Some work has started, and we certainly need to recognize that and continue to build on some of those actions that have been taking place over time. And some of these actions that I intend to touch on from the international perspective, we have the implementation of the Drought Initiative, which is a process that has actually been led by the Unccd Secretariat based on recommendations from country parties. And the Unccd has been supporting countries in development of national drought plan to ensure we are much more prepared in how we manage, monitor, and also, the mitigation of droughts. Guyana and Grenada have since completed this process, and I definitely urge other Caribbean states who have started to, or even who are now in the phase of actually starting this process, to definitely tap into these resources and ensure that you have such plans that are developed for your country. There's also the drought toolbox. So this toolbox, which has been developed under the guidance of the Unccd, it gives stakeholders easy access to monitoring and early warning, vulnerability and risk assessment, as well as risk mitigation measures. So they're better able to track what is taking place in terms of drought at the individual level, at the individual country levels, and also even further abroad. There is also the Intergovernmental Working Group on Drought, which has actually been developed to develop effective policy and implementation measures to address drought impacts in the context of the Unccd. Member states from various annexes are actually a part of this process, and they certainly in the Caribbean, we have our very own Dr. Redoxy, which is our soil doctor from the UME, that is actually sitting on this working group for the Caribbean. Regionally, countries have even set land degradation neutrality targets that basically allow them to have these voluntary targets to kind of guide how they're going to go about achieving land degradation neutrality. So countries like Belize, Guyana, Grenada, Jamaica, St. Lucia have already set these targets, and I encourage others to do same also. And from the setting of these targets, it actually allow these countries to now transition into the Caribbean Small Island Developing States Soil Care Project that is now actually at the stage of being considered for implementation. And through this project, we have 8 Caribbean countries that are actually participating. And this sort of bold collective step from the Caribbean under the guidance of the Partnership Initiative for Sustainable Land Management is quite an important aspect as we look to further realize the land-water nexus. So just to end, in terms of some of the recommendations, that by no means this is just what you want to focus on, where there are others, but these are some of the key ones. Land tenure security. A lot of the time in the Caribbean, we've been talking about this in terms of achieving land tenure security. It certainly goes a far way in terms of allowing persons to better invest in sustainable land management practices, because if you have ownership, you're more inclined to care for what you have ownership for. So if you give that ownership to persons, they're better able to make that sort of investment. Smallholder agricultural systems focus would definitely be important in terms of achieving improved land and water management, because these agricultural holders would play a key role in providing the necessary food for the projected increases in population that we expect to see in the future. And we certainly need to invest in rehabilitation of degraded land so as to increase water productivity, because improved land management certainly equals an improved water resource and agricultural livelihoods. So just to end, as we look to maximize natural capital conservation, we first want to see as far as possible how we can avoid by addressing the drivers of degradation and taking on more proactive measures. If we certainly can avoid, next step is to see how we can reduce through sustainable land management and sustainable forest management practices. And if that we really cannot do such, the last resort is reverse through restoration and rehabilitation. I thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Osborne, for your presentation. I think you've done an excellent job of emphasizing just how closely linked land issues are tied to issues of water management and water governance. At this time, we will interrupt our regular programming just to share a little bit of information with you of an ongoing campaign organized by Cyen and UNICEF, along with several regional collaborators, called the Stay Alive and Thrive Climate Action Campaign. The purpose of the campaign is to raise public awareness about the urgent need to mitigate and adapt to climate change across the Caribbean and around the globe. The Stay Alive and Thrive campaign features 26 Caribbean youth ambassadors that have come together to rally their peers, the public, and political leaders to lend their voices to be heard at the 26th Conference of Parties, COP26, which is a global United Nations summit about climate change and how countries are planning to tackle it, which is slated to be held from the 1st to the 12th of November 2021, pending improvements in the current COVID situation. We have a very brief video to show you on that, inviting you, our attendees and our participants, to consider not just signing the campaign, but sharing it widely with your colleagues and friends. So let's just have this quick video now. Are we gonna have the video, or should we move on and include the information in the chats of the various live streams? Okay, I think in the interest of time, we will come back to the video at a later date or a later time. And I'll hand back over to you, Juliet, to introduce our next panelists.
Thank you so much, Carisha. Yeah, we hope that many people from our audience share the petition, as you said, and it's fitting to follow such a critical call to climate action with our next presentation topic, land and climate change. Mrs. Janelle Tomlinson is involved in climate action, both through academia as a PhD candidate in geography and geology at the University of the West Indies, Jamaica, and through her activism, which includes her work with women in coffee farming and her work with youth as a co-founder of Young People for Action on Climate Change. She was the Jamaican youth delegate both for COP24 in Poland and COP25 in Madrid, the Prime Minister Youth Awardee for Environmental Protection in 2019, a Next Gen Climate Board member, and was recently recognized as the sole Caribbean youth on the 15 Next list highlighting young people working towards food security. I would like to remind our audience once again that the chat is open for questions, which will be answered by our panelists in the Q&A segment of the program. So we would like no one to walk away from this exercise with an unanswered question. Without nothing more to say, welcome Mrs. Tomlinson, the floor is yours. Do we have Mrs. Tomlinson with us?
Julia, I think she's not on the call at the moment, so we may need to move forward and come back to her presentation at the end. So we can continue on and we'll take her presentation thereafter. So with that being said, we will move to our next presentation and we'll get back to Ms. Tomlinson on the topic of land and climate change. We have a special speaker here with us today. This is Mr. Davidson Batiste. He is from Sandy Bay, a village of the Carib settlement on the northern part of St. Vincent in the Red Zone. He's a farmer, community worker, and a God-fearing man who is very committed, honest, responsible, influential, united, an ambassador, transformed, and disciple. Mr. Batiste often reiterates that he's not a perfect man, but being a leader, you must have certain qualities. He welcomes encouragement as he believes in helping to become a great leader in the future. This allows him to be able to train others to become better leaders as well. We are really pleased to have Mr. Batiste with us here this afternoon to help us to understand the impact of the Lucifer eruptions in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mr. Batiste, we thank you for agreeing to be here with us today, and you now have the floor. Mr. Batiste? We ask the audience to just bear with us for a few seconds while we get the presentation and the feed going.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Well, everyone hearing about the loss of rare, they would like to have something attractive, or maybe they want to be entertained by pictures of the loss of rare. But today, I want to speak a little on the impact of the loss of rare eruption on food security in St. Vincent. So I begin with this. On the highest mountain peak in St. Vincent, there's an active volcano whose name is the loss of rare. This volcano seems to love the Friday action. So on Friday 9th April, while I was on farm doing my usual farm duties, this terrible lady, loss of rare, burst into action. I heard a loud sound as of thunder non-stop. So I dropped tools and started heading for home. The moment the ash started falling and it was very hot, rushes the spirit. For days and weeks, I went back to see what has took place and saw that my crops were totally destroyed. And the area in the red zone was in terrible condition. It may be entertaining for some, and it may be an attraction for others. But for us of the red zone, it is terrible, grievous, and heartbreaking. I depend greatly on farming to take care of my family. And I am thinking, how would my family be taken care of if we should go back home to live in the red zone? All of our farmers had suffered and lost everything on their farms. So therefore, there would be a shortage of food in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the near future. The red zone, which was doing half of the farming done in St. Vincent, is totally destroyed now. And there will be, in the future, as I said, a shortage of food for solely animals for a quarter of the valley, because nothing was in place to protect the animals. Some of them suffered and died. And for that reason, the health problem would be serious if we should go back to the red zone. Food would be a problem. We would not be able to do farming to produce food for the people. I am appealing that people in authority, those in authority, that before we get back to farming, they should test the soil and see if it is safe for healthy food to grow, to feed our people. The water also need to be taken care of. The smell in the air of dead animals would be also a problem. And when the dry season comes around, those it will surely damage our crops, and we won't be able to produce the amount of food to feed our people. I can see the future tears of my fellow farmers. I can feel the future pain of my fellow farmers for food, for health, also for love and togetherness. I am wondering, how long are we going to look to the government to feed us? And how long is the government intend to feed us? What are we gonna do when the well runs dry? I mean, what the storerooms, when the storerooms are empty and foreign countries stop aiding us, what are we going to do? The effect of food protection is based strongly on those who are leading. But sadly, we are not seeing that in this country. Leaders want to be in position for a certain reason. Some to get rich and some to take advantage. Because this country has changed the meaning of love, we would always face problems. We need seriously to think of our people, that we all work together hand in hand to rebuild our nation, to get healthy food grow and water supplies back in order so that we can live a healthy life. There is a saying that the arms of flesh will fail you. You dare not trust your own. We are in a serious position and a serious condition we are in now. And yet, the people are not doing the things that they ought to do. They are straying away from God's truth and cleaving to what men are saying to them. I would like that those in authority to listen to me carefully. We need to work hand in hand when this is over, so that we can be able to live healthy, lovingly, and that all of us would be in one unity, caring for each other. My friends, I never like to belong in what I'm doing and saying. So I end here by saying, may the only one true and living world boss, which is in heaven, bless, guide, and protect us all as we continue to live our lives here on earth, pleasing to him. May God bless us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Baptiste. It's so sad to see the devastating impacts that the volcano eruption has had in the country, but we do hope that the volcanic activity will be completely stabilized soon and that from now on the situation will improve. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Nixon Barry, the Cyen Regional Steering Committee Chair, who will speak to us about the memorabilia of today's event. So welcome, Mr. Barry, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Protocol already established. I would like to recognize Honorable Youth Hall, Mr. Reginald Burke, Dr. Byron Cox, members of the panel, participants, all, good morning. I'm pleased to be here this morning to be a part of this discussion, and this important discussion, I must say, on land use management and the impacts it's having and how we can preserve our land. In terms of the memorabilia, the Caribbean Environment Network has decided that the memorabilia for this webinar should be the donation of trees to St. Vincent and the Grenadines to help with the rebuilding efforts post the last eruption of the La Soufrière volcano. The impact of the eruption has no doubt negatively impacted the vegetation, which can destabilize the soil and pose further threats to the environment. The Caribbean Environment Network understands the important role that trees play in our biodiversity and ecosystems. It is our hope that this contribution will go a long way in the reforestation efforts, protection of the soil, water supply, and of course, in ensuring food security, not only for the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but the region. Special thanks to the Unccd team for supporting this initiative and making it a reality. This partnership is very important to us. I would like to say thank you to the participants for being here and sharing in this special moment. Also, thanks to the organizing team and everyone who made this possible. The necessary arrangements will be made together with Cyen, Unccd, and the representative from the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So once again, thank you, and we look forward to more discussions like these.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. I think we can all agree that the memorabilia would serve to preserve the beautiful island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but I think we come to a critical part of the program where we allow you, the audience, to have your voices heard, to comment on the presentations and to seek answers on the issues of sustainable land management that might boggle your mind at the time. And I think the first question is quite an interesting one, and it is directed at Professor Cox. The question is, how can the youth link with the young at heart to ensure sustainable progression and generational transition of land management? Professor Cox?
Thank you very, very much. Could you repeat the question, because I'm not sure I understood exactly what is being asked of me. Okay. I'd be grateful if you repeat the question.
Sure. So how can we link or form a link between young people and the young at heart to ensure that there is sustainable progression and generational transition as it relates to land management?
Yes, now I understand the issue. I think, as I said earlier, I think the first thing that we need to understand is the common stake that we all have. And whether old, young, or in between, the Caribbean is our Caribbean. And the time has come that we can't wait for tomorrow. The youth must not think that it's tomorrow. It is now. If we do not understand that the older folks have something to teach the young ones, and the young ones have something new, a different vision, probably a better vision, and we need to combine those two things, we will make a big mistake. In very concrete terms, one, in order that we have this transformation, we have to appreciate that we all have a common stake in it. That's the first thing we need to do. The second thing is that I don't believe just at the national level that we need to work, but we need to work how we are working now here as a region, because the resources that we have, the human resources, the young people resources, as you saw today, we have people from Barbados, from Jamaica, yourself from Guyana, Ms. Hobson from Grenada, and so on. And I think that sort of working together is essential for this sort of transformation to take place. I think the third thing is that there is not enough investment in teaching and the issues of land. My point is this, that if you look carefully, until quite recently, everything about sustainable development in the Caribbean, we sort of dealt with the question of climate change. It's always climate change. And nobody seems to see the nexus between climate change and land. The elementary truth is this, that it is land, whether you like it or not, which serves as carbon sink for carbon sequestration of 70% of all carbon, either the soil itself or green trees. So I think the education which is necessary is not there at all, at all, at all. The other thing is this, that, and I think this is the most important thing in my view at least, that the agenda for sustainable development has been driven from outside. And that is why you don't have this connection between the old and the young in the way it ought to be. What we have is a connection with ourselves internally, politically, and with the rest of the world out there. But the internal connection, as the minister said, regardless of what, we have to start locally. So that kind of internal connection between us all is important. The final thing is this. I don't think that environmental leadership, that the young, for example, Ms. Thomason and Ms. Beckles and so on, and Cyen, I don't think that the leadership of the Caribbean today has an appreciation for the role of young people. And so I believe, this is my final thing, I believe that Cyen and institutions like those have a particular responsibility to ensure that somehow or the other, the young voices are heard, but not only heard, are educated. This is what we're trying to do, but are activated, right? If we don't do that, I don't think we would find a solution. Ultimately, though, we all must understand that we have a stake, and the stake is common. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Cox, for your very provoking response to that question. We'll move to our next question, which is for Mr. Osborne. And the question is, what are the main water sources that we have in the Caribbean, and how are these actually affected by climate change? Can you expound a little bit on that for us?
Thank you very much for that. In terms of the main water sources we have in the Caribbean, we have, well, for different countries will be started differently, but some countries you may have streams, creeks, rivers, some being the major sources, and we have aquifers that are recharging our groundwaters. But at the same time, some of the activities that we do on land in terms of unsustainable mining, unsustainable logging, unsustainable agricultural practices start to release contaminants into these waterways, which sort of settle downstream and certainly affect the communities that are adjacent to these water sources in terms of, and it has health issues, so many other issues. So if we're looking in terms of actions in order to ensure that we preserve what is taking place there, we certainly need to check and see how we are applying our skills on land, because it certainly have downstream impacts on the water sources that comes into our homes, the water sources that some persons may be using directly from these rivers, creeks, streams, and lakes, among other things.
Thanks, Mr. Osborne. Kaifa, back to you.
Yes. Right, so we'll move steadily along. The next question is just a general question anybody could answer. That is, how can we access as young people funding to help entrepreneurs create more jobs in the sustainable land management sector? How can we effectively access that funding that might be available in that area?
Do you want me to go at it first?
Yes, yes.
Okay, well, the first thing you have to do in all of these situations is know where the money is. If you don't know where the money is, you can't access it. You have to know where the money is. That's the first thing. And these sources are across the board, whether public sources or private sources, or this is the part that most people miss, cooperative sources. That's the first thing. The second thing in terms of access then for young people is that you have to speak the language of those who have the money. If you don't do that, you're in trouble. You go there and you start to talk, in a language which they don't understand. That is not going to happen, right? You're not going to get the money. The third thing is that to access money as young people, I think even if you don't have money yourself, you have to do something. You understand? In other words, you have to show people that you're not just here to beg for money, but you're doing something. And while you're doing that, you realize some money is needed. If you don't do that, people are like, you come begging for money. And what are you doing? What are you doing to help yourself? I think that's the third important thing. Fourth, and probably most importantly in all of this, is that the young people must first and foremost try to set the agenda. It is when the agenda is set, then the money follows the agenda. You understand? If you're going to talk to people about something that they have no interest in, okay, you will not get any money for it. So I think these are all, just to give you an example, a few years ago, the University of the West Indies created a book about legislation that dealt with sustainable development. The entire book dealt with climate change, biodiversity. There was not a word about land. Not a single word. You understand? Not a single word about land. So the point is, therefore, that you have to create the agenda. You have to sort of say, well, this is what is important. Lastly, I think the investment climate in the Caribbean today and how we operate, I do not believe that the public sector itself is doing as much as it should do. I say this and taking into consideration St. Vincent and the Grenadines in particular. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines have what is called a prime program for young people. It is focused on them. And the interesting thing about this program is that it is a grant. You understand what I'm saying? So we have been focusing on young people in terms of education and so on and so on. But in terms of investing, giving them money, that has not been a big thing in the Caribbean. And that policy need to change. Now that discussion cannot be a discussion which is determined just by policymakers alone or by those who have money. It has to be determined by the young people. So again, the vehicles of CYEN and so on have got to take on that kind of discussion, have got to take on that agenda, you understand, and push that agenda. If you don't, an individual young person going begging for money or whatever is going to find it difficult. But if you have a sort of stream that flows, a current that says, look, this is what we need to do. And yes, we have invested in our young people in terms of education and so on, but they need some money too. Without money, this is not going to work, you understand? But you don't have that as a universal cry in the Caribbean up to this point. If you check carefully, the education business, yes, the training business, yes, the university business, yes. But in terms of saying, give young people some money, give them real money, you don't have that kind of discussion taking place in the Caribbean. So that needs to be changed. I think those are some of the things we need to address.
Thanks very much, Dr. Cox. Mr. Osborne or any of the other panelists would like to chime in at this time with a response? Or can we move to the next question? Okay, if not, we will move to the next question. And this again is a question posed to any of our panelists who would like to respond. And it's on the issue of soils. And the question is, how is soil management covered by the themes that we've addressed throughout the webinar? Any of the panelists who would like to take this question, feel free to do so.
If I may.
Please, Mr. Osborne, proceed.
I'll just go ahead and then I'm sure Dr. Cox would follow and my other colleague from St. Vincent. When we speak of soil, at the same time, whenever the conversation of land comes up, soil is a part of it. So soil plays a key role in everything we do. But for far too long, soil conservation matters have not been given the kind of importance that it should have been given. And if we look in the Caribbean, across the Caribbean in terms of soil assessments being done, it probably dates back all the way to the 1960s. So it has not been given that kind of importance that it should be given. But what I can say is that through the Caribbean Soil Care Project that is now coming on stream, there are a lot of components in there that intends to address the whole aspect of soil conservation management. And most importantly, when Caribbean countries have been reporting on soil organic carbon, we usually depend on default data that comes from the UNCCD. But through this project, we're hoping to have more indigenous data that gives the true reflection of what takes place on the ground, so we're better able to have that soil conversation and report on what is taking place in soil in that regard.
May I add something to this, if you don't mind? Yes, as Mr. Osborne has said, the whole issue as to what is really happening in our soils and so on is not deeply understood and deeply, well, some efforts are being made at this now, but it's not deeply understood and deeply studied. But however, let me answer the original question, which is, how did we cover the question of soil? Well, we didn't cover it in any great detail, but if you remember, I said this, that when we talk about land in this context, we're talking about bioproductive land, which is actually about soils, because it is the type of soil that we're talking about. You have lands which are rocks, you understand, nothing can grow on them, right? So the idea was always a discussion about bioproductive land, which in this case is directly linked with soils, okay? Now, let us deal with the Caribbean in a very fundamental way. As Mr. Osborne would tell you, the coastline of Guyana, right, where quite a lot of people live, is actually below sea level, right? Miss Jackson knows that as well. And the sea encroaching on that not just causes soil salination, you understand what I'm saying, but it drowns everything there, okay? That's one. Two, let's look at St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and Dominica, for example. Anytime you have a great shower of rain, I don't know if you ever looked out on the ocean after a great shower of rain, after downpour. The first 3 miles or so out there is what color? Brown. Have you ever looked at it? It's brown. What does that tell you? It tells you that a significant part of the topsoil of these islands are being washed away. Okay, how do we deal with that? How do we relate to that kind of thing? But outside of that, I think we all know that because, as I said earlier in my presentation, because we have what is called plantation economics. Okay, over the years, over the last 120 years or so, what we had was a kind of agriculture which introduced many things into our soil, chemical things and so on. You understand what I'm saying? So the nature of that soil over a period of time would have changed, okay? Now, how do we deal with that? Now, you might say to yourself, well, oh, this is not an important issue. It is. Let me tell you this. At the end of the 18th century, okay, just before the revolution in Haiti, the Great Revolution, the greatest Black revolution of all times. You understand, right? Haiti had the most productive soils in the entire Caribbean. In the entire Caribbean, okay? Now, if there is desertification in the Caribbean, the first example of that is what? Haiti. So within 120 years or so, that part of what we call Hispaniola, because as we know, Haiti is part of Hispaniola. It's an island which is made up of 2 countries, the Dominican Republic, right? And Haiti, okay? And that part, right, has moved from the most productive soils anywhere in the Caribbean to what? To what we call desertification. The point that Mr. Osborne, I think, is making is this, that what we have is a progressive reduction, you understand, in the bioproductivity of our soil in one way or the other. And we have to look at this very carefully. There has to be careful study of it. I don't think we have this sort of in-depth understanding. And it leads me again. I think it's one of the fields that I think Mr. Osborne would agree with me. It's one of the fields that we need to have more young people go into. Because if we don't, Ms. Hobson, you're from Grenada, and you know, if you look back at it yourself, you know, for example, that after serious rain, you look out at St. George's and you can see the brown out in the water. You can see it there, okay? So you know it is being washed away. I'm not making up a story here. This is fact. So the issue, therefore, is an issue of a sort of more comprehensive understanding of what is the value of soil to us. Now it comes back, I'm going to finish now. It comes back to this, that as I said, if you look at our argument about sustainable development, it was always about climate change and biodiversity, you know. You understand? We never understood the crucial issue of land and soil in the matter. A matter of fact, Guyana is the only country in the Caribbean that the national anthem mentions soil, well, land, 7 times. 7 times. It's the only anthem in the world like that. The national anthem mention land 7 times. St. Vincent should mention it like 25 times because we are 1 million times smaller than Guyana. We should mention it about 25 times. But the point I'm trying to make is this, that we see everything else, you understand, except the foundation of what we are, which is land. We see everything else. And so I think over the years, we have not been involved in this business. Last but not least, we come from a slave culture, right? We come from a slave culture. We were slaves for hundreds of years. And the black man in the Caribbean always wanted to escape the land, work in an office, work somewhere else. You understand? The time has come to change that. When we change that mentality, we would come to appreciate, as Guyana does in its national anthem, what our soil means to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Professor Cox, Mr. Osborne. I think that evokes a little emotion in everybody, maybe to the point where I would sing our national anthem. I'm kidding. But I think the next question goes to Mr. Baptiste, and it's also a bit thought-provoking. I'm hoping Mr. Baptiste, you can answer, but the question is specifically, what support do you think farmers in St. Vincent and the Grenadines would require in order to rebuild and recover from a natural disaster? Mr. Baptiste?
Yes. Farmers in St. Vincent, especially of the red zone, need full support financially so that they can get back to their farm. We need fertilizers to build back. We need soil testing to be sure that our soil, we only urge that the ash is very good for farming, but we need to test it. And we need that the people in the Ministry of Agriculture to do exactly what they are to do. Okay? We will love to see that the Ministry of Agriculture gets seriously and support the farmers financially and with help, with tools, inputs to go in their land. And everything is destroyed, so we need plants, almost everything a farmer needs. We all need it at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baptiste. I think we can all agree that we shouldn't lose the momentum on trying to support our sister country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in enabling them to at least get back to some kind of normalcy on the island. Unfortunately, that is the last question that we were able to address at this point in time. A lot of questions came in, but we are at this moment pressed for time and over the time that we would have anticipated the program would have run. So I will now hand you back over to Ms. Carisha, who will take you on to the conclusion of the program. Carrie?
Yeah,
thanks very much for that, Kaifa. And Julia, just before we hand back over to you, we've again apologize because we're already a little bit over time, and we probably should at this stage express apologies on behalf of one of our speakers who seems to have lost connectivity and was not able to rejoin us. And so we missed a critical presentation on land and climate change. However, we hope that we'll be able to address this issue at another time. We are very grateful that the Minister, Honorable Minister Todd, was able to remain with us for the duration of the presentations, the event. And we're just going to give him a few options at this time. If he would be willing to provide a few thoughts after hearing the presentations and listening to the responses of the questions, if you would like to chime in at this time, we'd like to give you a special opportunity to do so now. Minister Todd, would you like to leave us with any final thoughts or any reflections on the presentations? If not at this time, Minister Todd, then we will hand back over to Julia as we seek to wrap up.
Thank you so much, Carisha. So yeah, thank you so much to our audience for being active during the panel discussion and participating in the Q&A segment. And thank you to all our panelists for the rich answers that they provide us. Now we would like that our audience to pay attention to the video that we are about sharing with you. The video is presented by Mrs. Sandrine Restester, the Executive Assistant in the Capacity Development and Innovation Office of the Unccd Secretariat in Bonn, Germany, where I'm currently doing my internship. Let's move on to the video.
You are the Caribbeans today and tomorrow. You are serious about contributing to the sustainable development of your beautiful region. And you want to increase your knowledge and skills, gain experience to help you do this. The Unccd Secretariat is about to launch its special distance internship program for the SIDS. It is tailor-made just for you. You will work with young people from around the world and experience working with United Nations top professionals. You will bring that wonderful Caribbean flavor to our work environment. It's your opportunity to gain something additional to share with your Caribbean and help make it what you want it to be. Remember, check this link for the news is coming soon, and we shall be waiting to welcome you.
Beautiful.
Thanks very much for that video, Ms. Sandrine. And we hope that the participants paid attention to this important information. Well, everyone, this brings us to the end of what we hope was a very vibrant, informative, and meaningful panel discussion. We do have to apologize for the technical issues that we face, but we do know that we live in a very dynamic world, and sometimes we have to adjust to things on the fly. And it means that sometimes we have problems, but as Caribbean people who demonstrate resilience, we push forward and we move through. So we hope that everyone who was present here today has been inspired in some way to become more involved in land issues here in the Caribbean. Julia, you're not here, unmute.
We thank in a special way all of our presenters today, starting with a very special thank you to the Honorable Minister Tut of Guyana for willingly accepting our invitation to open this event with your words of wisdom and encouragement. It was truly an honor. So thank you once again. We will also thank our brilliant panelists, Dr. Byron Cox, Mrs. Beckles, Mr. Osborne, and Mrs. Baptiste, for agreeing to present for us today on the critical topics we addressed during these few hours, and giving us so much rich content to spark our discussion.
We also want to take the time to thank all of the team members, both of Cyen and Unccd, who have worked really hard over the last few months to put together this activity. None of this would be possible today if not for your dedication, and as we like to say in the Caribbean, with your blood, sweat, and tears. Finally, we can have the best program in the world, but if we have no one to deliver it to, it is useless. Therefore, we must give the biggest thanks to all of you, our attendees, joining us via our various media platforms. We truly hope that you found this activity to be a worthwhile event and that you'll be interested in joining us for further activities.
And please note that the recording of today's session will be available on YouTube. We also encourage you to follow the Cyen and the Unccd on our various social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And yeah, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and enjoy the rest of your day. We look forward to seeing you the next time at our coming events. Until the next time, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.